All right, thank you, Spee. First, we've got a few new people in the room. I'm not going to go around and make people stand up, but I did want to acknowledge our colleagues from Burkina Faso whose flight was delayed, and Siaka made the end of yesterday, and I see Sean's here today, so welcome to you and to others that are joining us today. I also just want to make the observation that this phenomena where the back tables get filled to the hilt and then there's empty tables up front. So don't move now, but as we move into the plenary on measurement, I'd encourage people to move forward and maybe get a closer look. So a couple of reflections from yesterday. I mean, in addition to the reams and reams of questions, comments, thoughts that were captured on the flip charts, there was a lot going on throughout the day, so impossible to capture that in a few slides here. We are attempting to capture that in a report that will come out of this meeting. Jennifer Sebstead, where are you? Here is going to be the lead author in pulling that together, but we're working with the chairs to make sure that that report really reflects not only the content prepared ahead of time, but some of the discussion that took place, and it's been very rich indeed. So just a couple of reflections, and these were sort of buckets. One of the big ones is achieving scale. We had a good early intervention from our colleague Bafo on the need to engage government, to not find ourselves in this situation where we're not doing that because the capacity is not there, and then 15 years from now we're still not doing it because the capacity is not there, that we need to begin building capacity as part and parcel of what we're doing on resilience, wherever we're doing it, even in challenging context. And I think that we are going to have a good example today from Kenya of what it looks like when you have made those investments and realize that this isn't a 5-year project cycle. This is indeed a very long-term vision and requires us to engage not only governments, but communities and individuals, and make building agency amongst communities, individuals, governments, part and parcel of what we do. And I think that that's an incredibly important takeaway from yesterday. In a similar vein, engaging the private sector. I think that there are instances, and I know that Michael Carter and Chris Barrett will be talking about an index-based livestock insurance effort in Kenya that engaged a government-private sector partnership arrangement when it was scaled up. And that's a good example, but I think we all recognize the need to more deeply engage the private sector as part of achieving scale. And I think as someone who works for a very large donor, I think we often make the mistake of seeing ourselves as the scale agents. We have an opportunity as donors to play a role testing innovation, but we need to begin thinking of these projects as tools to build the capacity of government, private sector, to take some of the risks that maybe they can't, to show something that works. And I attended the social protection graduation discussion yesterday, and John Meyer, raise your hand, talked about a program, a Feed the Future program in Ethiopia called GRAD, which had some pretty incredible results. It increased incomes by $373 per household over the period, allowed many households to self-graduate from the Productive Safety Net program, but it only reached 33,000 households. And so it's a great project in terms of demonstrating the model, but the huge value of that project is that the government of Ethiopia then took the lessons and built it into its 8 million person Productive Safety Net program. So that's a great example. I think another great example is the work on index-based livestock insurance that for relatively small funding was able to test and prove a model. Government of Kenya scaled that model. That insurance product is now paying out to hundreds of thousands of pastoralists during the current drought. So this idea of donor investment being a tool to test innovation, and from the outset, seeing it not as an end in itself, but a tool to engage government, private sector is incredibly important. And let's see, next slide. This came out loud and clear at the opening session, but I think it was reflected throughout the day, and that's the need to move towards a systematic sharing of knowledge, whether it's on approaches to resilience measurement, on the evidence that's being generated. It's great that we're able to get you guys all to come to Washington for 2 days and sit and network, but this is still a very personalized network approach. And I hear you loud and clear, and I hope other donors in the room did as well. I think we have a role to play there. I think at a country level, government has a role to play, and I think we'll hear about that in the case of Kenya, and making sure that everybody's aligned towards not only a shared vision, but our terms of our shared support to governments at both national level and local level. I think it can be overwhelming when a bunch of different approaches are being presented by different technical partners, all well-meaning, but we haven't distilled a sort of common set of straightforward approaches. And I know our colleague, Mr. Baua, is here, mentioned to me yesterday that as they're looking across the Sahel and the work with SILS, Agromet, ECOWAS related to Algier and their broader regional resilience effort, sort of how do we get to not a simplistic approach to measurement, but an understandable one that can be applied at a broad and scaled up rather than a projectized approach to resilience measurement. And then finally, there's a concern here that some of our measurement might be too focused on quantifiable well-being outcomes, things like poverty. I may be added to the anxiety here by repeatedly asking people to translate their work into humanitarian assistance needs averted. Erwin, where are you? Are you here this morning? He's not, but I really put him on the spot yesterday with that question. There's, of course, a purpose to that. What have I done? There's a purpose to that in terms of what Stefan was talking about yesterday. There's a marketing element to what we do when we're talking to Congress, when we're talking to our own leadership about the value of these investments. But by no means should we stop there, because this isn't just about marketing. This is about social transformation, and I think some of the work we're going to hear about today around measuring aspiration, the role of aspiration, people's own perceptions about the ability to cope with shocks and stresses is some of the most important measurement work we're doing. So I'm really excited to hear from that panel as well. But I think we need to sort of balance that. Yes, there's an imperative to deliver on sort of quantifiable, measurable value for money in terms of what investors get out of these investments, but also recognize that the primary focus should be on the people we're working with. And how are these investments not only changing their quantifiable poverty status or their need for humanitarian assistance, but their aspiration, their confidence, and their agency. And that's something we started with here. A lot of what we talk about in resilience is giving people agency or choice. We talked about this yesterday. I talked about it in relation to pathways out of poverty and chronic vulnerability. You know, whether a household chooses to go all in agriculture or step a foot out or move out, it's partially shaped by their resources, their assets, constraints they face. It's also partially shaped by their aspiration, and I think that's a critical thing, part of what we do.